Hi everybody and welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on this common garden variety juniper. We know it affectionately as mint julep because when you crush the foliage you get a very characteristic mint smell. The history behind this tree is that it is a customer's tree. When he came to me a couple of years ago with the tree and wanted me to work on it, we assessed the health of the tree first and once again determined that the soil that it was growing in was really not suitable, a very sandy, composty type soil mix. And we then proceeded to repot it. We had to wait until the season was right, and then we repotted it into a mix of akadama and pumice. That was one part of each, equal parts, akadama, pumice. And as you can see, the tree has really responded very well. There's a lot of new growth on it. And in fact, this area of the tree has become so heavy that the tree is actually bowing down due to the weight. So the customer has given the tree back to me again to work on it, and I'm going to be sharing that work that I'll be doing on the tree today with yourself. So the first thing that I want to do is just take and do an overall sort of take on the tree and just check if there's any pests, what the health of the tree is like before I start working on it, and also to see at what state the foliage is at, where it's healthy, see where I've got new growth that I can cut back into and redevelop certain structural portions of this tree. And then also the customer has unfortunately allowed the wire to bite in quite considerably on some of the branches. And so the first thing after assessing the general health of the tree will be to remove all of that wire. There is quite a bit of wire bite, and I'll be looking at how to deal with that. And then I'll be wiring the tree again, structurally wiring it and repositioning the branches. There is a metal rod that I used initially a year or two ago to do the initial styling with, but I will see if I can remove that, but I'm probably going to be tempted to leave it in for as long as possible. There isn't any wire bite yet on the wires and the guy wire that connects the portions yet either. So with junipers or with conifers in general, one needs to be very careful of removing such structural aids or wiring aids, because the branches have a tendency to eventually move back into, or at least somewhat into, their old position. So I'll be looking at that and see whether I can remove it. And then there's just some normal sort of boring maintenance stuff like weeding that I can do as well. So when assessing the health of this tree, I can immediately see that there are certain portions or pieces of growth which are very have a lot of vitality, and these are very important to ensure the future of your tree, because these are young, vigorous portions of growth versus this more leggy, older portion, which is a problem because you've got healthy growth at the tip, but you don't have anything further back, and it is quite leggy. So what I do want to do is, where I can, to use growth like this to redevelop structural portions, bearing in mind that this tree is still very much raw material and is still at very much of an infancy stage of its life or development as a bonsai tree. So normally under maintenance tasks you would be looking at removing branches from the crotches like this, but this is maybe something that I will need to consider keeping and rather eliminating something else, which will also help to bring growth back into the interior of the tree. So I'll be able to start ramification further back. If you look at a long section like this, which is very leggy and there's absolutely nothing happening on here, yeah, sure, we might get some budding, but at the moment there isn't anything happening there, and so possibly something like this could be eliminated in favor of something like this, which could then be wired in to replace the position that that branch held. One of the other problems with this tree at the moment is that, as I mentioned, the wire was allowed to remain on too long. And so now this wire will need to be removed carefully so as not to, especially now because the tree is growing actively. So essentially the phloem or the living tissue is going to be floating on the wood below it. So one needs to be very careful that when you're removing wire like this, that you don't tear off the bark as well, because it will be very easy to do that at this point in time. Then, as I mentioned, I'm going to be weeding, doing just a boring maintenance task of weeding while the tree is on the bench, or you should always look at how, if there's any of these sort of tasks that you need to do. It's the easiest to do it when you can be focused on the tree, and it's always best to remove especially this clover-like weed now, so that before it seeds, because once they flower and seed, the seeds go everywhere, not only in this tree, in this container, but in any bonsai trees that are adjacent to this one. So whenever you see weeds, it's best to not procrastinate and get on top of it immediately. When I look at this tree, and the thought that I had when the customer originally brought it to me was to create some kind of a Bunjin style juniper. The material lent itself to that, of course. It was when the tree first came to me, it was very weak. It had very little foliage on it, and it just had this interesting trunk line and quite a sinuous, interesting line. So that is really what you're looking for in good Bunjin, is an interesting trunk line. And also because it was fairly slender. I mean, the trunk at the base is not very chunky, and it didn't taper off tremendously until you got to the apical area of the tree. But what has happened now is that as the tree's vigor has increased and it has developed a lot of foliage, there's a lot of foliage mass or volume in this area now, and for a Bunjin it's far too much. And as I mentioned earlier as well, that the weight of it has actually become so much that it has altered the angles of the structural portions above it. So today I'm going to see how much I can reduce this by. If I'm going to be reducing this by a lot, I need to be careful not to reduce this much, this portion of the tree, the apical portion, too much, because reducing too much or taking too much foliage mass away in one sitting will weaken the tree, because the strength of junipers is very much in the foliage, and so we need to be careful not to remove too much. I know that the species is a very vigorous grower. It's very robust. It's not a very sensitive or fragile type of juniper. So one can be quite aggressive with it, but nevertheless, the point of bonsai is not to bring a tree within a brink of its existence. You want to try and keep the tree in a healthy condition at all times, because also that will help you, or help the tree rather, to ward off attacks by pests, for instance. So first step will be to remove the wire. Now normally I would prefer to cut wire off using a scissors type wire cutter or a pliers. Let me show you a typical, this is your bonsai wire cutter, and as you can see, because it has a very stubby nose or cutting edge, it allows you to get right up to the branch and then cut the wire with the maximum amount of blade making contact with the wire. But unfortunately, as the wire has bitten in so severely on this tree, I'm not going to be able to cut the wire. So I'm going to have to unwind the wire very carefully, also taking care not to lift any of the bark, the living tissue, from the branches, now that we're in an active growing period. So to remove the wire, I'm just going to take the wire in my fingers and just do the reverse of applying the wire. And you can use, if it's a bit difficult for you to get into a spot, you can just use a pair of pliers. And then I like to wire or unwind the wire in sections, so that and take it from, unwind it from both ends, so that the wire is still anchored, because otherwise it tends to want to roll over or roll around or sort of corkscrew on the branch, and then that could result in stripping the bark off as well. I've now finished removing the wire, and the next step will be to go through the foliage and start seeing what I can remove, what branches I can remove, especially in this lower drooping branch area, because the weight of that is far too much for the style of the tree. So I'm going to be looking for more delicate inner branches, so something that's further back into the structure of the tree to cut back to. If I can't find something, then I'll have to leave it, because you basically have to allow the tree, the strength of the tree, to produce the inner buds or the back budding. So it's unlike a deciduous tree where you can prune and then you have an auxin redistribution and then buds popping out. With conifers, you generally have to allow them to extend, become stronger and stronger, and they will of their own accord push buds on the interior. So normally where you have growth on the inside the crotches of branches, or just adventitiously developing that you don't want, you would eliminate those. But sometimes in a case like this, you actually want to encourage those to become stronger, and then when they're strong enough, you can cut back to them. To do this work, I'm going to be using a combination of tools. We'll be using a trimming scissors and a narrow branch cutter, and then also your standard branch cutter. All of these tools are from Canishan. They are available from our website. You can also, if you're outside of South Africa, you can also order these tools directly from Canishan themselves on their website. It's a good idea to, before you start with the wiring of branches, to clean them out as well. So I'm just removing some weak inner foliage, and then it'll make it easier to apply the wire, because you won't have foliage getting in the way of the wire. And the next step will be to wire the branches, and I'm not going to do any major structural wiring. It's just going to be wiring these thinner branches. There's a very limp kind of growth habit in this juniper, so it's really just to give them some structure, place them in a position and allow them to grow in. Before I wire, I just want to treat or do something with these knobs or sections of branch that I did not cut off, and I'm going to gin them. So that is going to look something like this. You're just going to use your branch cutter just to almost ring bark it, and then you can then use a pliers, just crush that tissue, and at the moment, as you can see, it's essentially floating on the wood below, so it's very easy to remove. And then what you can then do is split this if you want to, just break these fibers, and then using the same ginning pliers you can then just peel this wood fiber away, and that just gives it a little bit more of a natural look, it's sort of suggesting a branch that ripped and tore off. So you don't want to end with a blunt knob as such. So let me show that process to you again. I'm just going to use a branch cutter just to sever or divide the living tissue so that when you remove it, that it doesn't remove further back than where you wanted it to. And then at this time of the year, you'll see that it's very easy to remove the live tissue because it's floating. And there you can see how easily it just comes off, leaving the wood exposed. And then you can simply split that a couple of times with your branch cutter. And that really this is to get the fibers started that you can grab a hold of and just then peel back with your ginning pliers. If you can, it would be a good idea to look for some natural inspiration. So take a walk in the woods or somewhere and look for branches of trees or trees that have had limbs broken from them and see what that looks like. It is easier to do this when the wood is still wet. It's a lot more difficult to do it if it is dry. In fact, the fibers don't peel as easily when they are dry as they do when they are wet. So it's a good idea to do this at this point in time and not allow it to dry out. Okay, as I mentioned, the next step will be to wire the tree, and I'm going to be using copper wire to do the wiring with. Using copper wire, I'm just able to use less wire and to have the same amount of hold, and due to the work hardening of copper wire, it has a better hold of the branch once I've bent it into position. The branches of conifers generally have a bit more of a springy habit to deciduous trees, and so the work hardening characteristic of copper wire definitely helps in wiring such species. So I'm going to wire in the same direction as the wire bite, because the sap flow has already been established, and so it's important to obey that wire bite. The sap flow has been altered slightly, and so it's a good idea to keep the same flow going where possible. But you obviously won't wire in the same groove though. You need to wire next to it. or the way that you create juniper pads is by layering, first of all, spreading out the branchlets, sort of like your hand, the same sort of shape, with your hand being the structural branch and then the secondary branches fanning out from there. And then, so if you look at this particular branch, you'll see that the main structural branch is running along here, and then you have the secondary branches that are branching off from that, and they sort of splay out from that. And then you need to give curves or shape to the branches in both the top view, or if you look at it from the top, that it has movement, but it's also very important to give it some movement when viewing it from the front. And so then, if you're creating smaller pads, so this one area wouldn't work as a single foliage pad. You need to break it up into individual smaller pads, but then the total pad needs to be read as one unit. But the smaller pads gives it some interest, some definition, and if you like, it breaks that positive space or the line that is created by the foliage pad, and it creates a more interesting positive and negative space around it. So when you're creating the pad, you need to be layering the individual pads. So in this area, yeah, we have a pad that this branch is higher up, and so this pad has been created in this zone here. And then as we move down into down along the pad, I have created smaller pads, and these fill this space. But if you look at the entire volume of foliage, there is an imaginary line around it as well, but it is broken up by the individual pads. But it's also then important to create volume, vertical volume to the pad, by layering smaller branches over the pad, and they don't extend to the outline they do extend to the outline, but they are slightly set back from the lower portion of the branch pad. And you'll also see that these tertiary branches, or rather secondary branches, are also at different heights. So they're not, if viewed from the side, the pad should not be this kind of a pancake shape at all. It should have a vertical mass to it as well. This is very severe wire bite, but I'm going to leave it as is. There is a new sap flow, or the sap flow has been changed or altered due to the wire that bit in. This will soften with time, but what I might do is actually remove the bark, the live tissue from the bottom, the trough area of this wire bite in a few of these areas, and then that could become shari. But for the moment, I'm going to leave it as is. Long whips like this can be just wired into a rough position and then allowed to extend, so without pruning off the tip of the branch, and so then it can just extend and become thicker at the base, and then you can then after setting this in position, you can then build your secondary branching from this. Sometimes when you wire branches, you'll find that the secondary branch, or tertiary branch in this case, comes out at the wrong angle. But if you've wired correctly, then you can twist the branches so that you can raise this up into a more flat and therefore usable position. So this branch was wired in a clockwise direction, and so I was able to twist it in a clockwise direction, thus raising this growth into position. Otherwise, it was growing out of the bottom of the pad and would need to have been eliminated if I hadn't done that. I finished the work today on this juniper. I did the weeding, although I didn't show that to you because I'm sure you know what weeding looks like. So I've covered everything that I needed to do. The foliage was reduced in this lower drooping branch. It was not befitting for the style, which is a Bunjin style. And Bunjin style is typified by generally a lighter area feel to the foliage, and that was too dense. The foliage of this juniper is not the most desirable type. It tends to be quite leggy and limp. You need to take into account the material that you're working with and what you can achieve with it. If you were to, for instance, compare this to Shimpaku or Sargenti or the Itoyagawa or Kishu, any of those, that has a much more compact, more rigid foliage, and so you can achieve a much crisper outline to pads. And but I think if you take that into account and appreciate the species that you're working with, so in a case like this, I just need to accept the fact that I'm not going to get the same feel on this tree as I would using a different foliage type of juniper. But that doesn't mean to say that that this is not pleasing. It just would have a different effect. Of course, one can graft, and you can totally change the foliage of this tree, but that is not something that my customer has decided to do. And so we will proceed with this foliage type and build the structure. So this is only the second styling of this tree. So it's still very young as a bonsai tree, and putting it into a better soil mix and getting the tree more vigorous is going to allow us to work on it more frequently. And so after this work now, it'll go back out, placed in full sun, given lots of fertilizer and correctly watered. And then at the end of the growing season in autumn, or probably most likely winter, we will then take another look at the tree and see if the wire is starting to bite in. I did show you some wire bite on this tree, and although some wire bite on conifers is actually a good idea, because if you remove the wire too early, then the branches are likely just to return to the positions that they were in before you wired them. So as a general rule, I tend to only remove the wire from a juniper or pine or whatever conifer once I see it biting in. Although you don't want to wait until the wire is biting in as severely as it was on this tree. So just to recap on creating the foliage pads, you need to remember that the foliage pads have a volume to them. And very often in books, you will see a very plan view, a top view, bird's eye view of foliage pads. And you will see nice snaking curves in them. But what you often don't see, or perhaps appreciate sometimes, is that what you're seeing as the viewer when you look at bonsai trees is the front, not the top necessarily, unless you're standing right in front of the tree and looking down at it. So you need to create volume with the pads by layering the branches so that you can see that layering and that movement from the front as well. Otherwise you end up with very flat pads, or otherwise you're creating like a tuft of foliage rather than creating the volume with branches or network of branches. Junipers have to be one of the most popular species of tree to grow as bonsai, and they are very rewarding. They're great to work with for many reasons, and if you don't have one in your collection, I would highly encourage you to get one.